Hi, welcome to the Get Unstuck Today Summit. My guest today has a fascinating, fantastic subject. This is Candace Cave. Welcome, Candace. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Kurt. So, I'm going to share with you my awakening experience. My husband and I owned a cruising sailboat, 35 feet long, and we sailed over 40,000 miles on the Pacific Ocean. The first time we crossed an ocean, we were traveling from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, to the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia. They're 850 miles northeast of Tahiti. It's about 2,800 miles with no land in sight. For 30 days, we were at sea. And after about 4 days, I began to become increasingly uncomfortable. When you're on a small boat on the ocean, everything moves all the time, all directions, all the time. And I came to a point where I couldn't stand the movement any longer. I had no idea it was going to be like this on a long ocean crossing. I'd had this dream for 20 years, right, to sail around the South Pacific in a boat lined with books. And here I was doing it. And 4 days away from land, I didn't like it anymore, right? But there was no turning back. I was committed. And I'd still have to do 4 more days of hell if I turned back. So we plowed on. I came to a place on the fifth day where I was in absolute despair. I just didn't know how I could go on. I wanted everything to stop, even if just for 5 seconds. Stop, please, moving. And I cried myself to sleep on my bunk. When I woke up, everything had changed. The boat was still moving, the ocean was still moving, the clouds were still moving. But I felt like I was in the very center of stillness. And it was a stillness that pervaded everything, pervaded the movement of the clouds, the movement of the boat. I was right there in the middle, and all the movement of life was passing through. I didn't mind the movement from here. It wasn't affecting me because I was stillness, disentangled from that movement. This way of being continued for the next 25 days until we got to land. It was quite extraordinary, but it was also very ordinary. It became just the way that life was. I functioned beautifully, but I was this still center of all this luminous stillness. And I felt one, like this. I was one with the stars at night, right? I was one with the clouds and the water and the dolphins and the birds. But I was also separate. I was also myself in the center. Within 24 hours of landing, getting back on land and getting out amongst people, that experience dissolved. It disappeared. I wasn't able to keep it. I would get entangled in life. So for the next 25 years, I kept going to sea and I kept having this experience on a longer ocean crossing. I couldn't make it happen, but I had to do this sort of surrendering into the movement, right? Letting go of my grip on not liking it, to have this feeling of oneness. And during that 25 years, I spent a lot of time on land. We we sailed part-time and had careers, my husband and I, and began to really look at different practices that would help me have this experience when I was in the world of people. Right? Because I knew it was something that was real. And I'd been doing yoga for a decade by the time I had this experience. So I knew that this was some sort of samadhi or transcendent experience, but it didn't feel like what all the somatic teachers were pointing me to, the dance teachers and the mythology teachers and the somatic psychologists. They were telling me, get your mind and body together, right? Right. But it wasn't all their methods. They were keeping me with the movement. They weren't pointing me to the stillness. And then in 2011, I found a book called The Intimate Life. by Judith Blackstone. And in reading it, she described an experience that sounded like exactly what I'd experienced at sea. So I was able to eventually take a class from her. And during the class, she said, feel that you're inside your body, find the space outside your body, and experience that the space inside and outside your body is pervasive. It's the same continuous space of silence or stillness. And I went, bingo, this is it. This is that experience that I felt at sea. And so I began to study with her. And 14 years later now, that's all I do is I teach people to awaken to this ground of being, how to inhabit their body, how to find the depth of themselves in the center of their being, the subtle core, and how to live disentangled from the movement of life, to actually include the stillness of the ground of being in their experience of the world. You know, this is a hidden wisdom. People have had this always, this ground of being. You can feel it sometimes in nature, right? You feel one with nature sometimes, right? Or in love of a child, you feel that meaning and connection. That's you accessing that stillness, that pervasive ground that pervades us all. But we're humans, which means that we have to learn how to be in the world from our infancy. And our species seems to have forgotten how to be with the stillness as well as the movement. Even our modern somatic therapists, our psychotherapists, all of our healers and philosophers and scientists, everyone looks at the world now as though there's nothing more subtle than the subtlest movement. And that's actually not true. There's a still spaciousness, the ground of being, that is part of our humanness. It's part of our aliveness. But we have to learn how to find it and attune to it. So that's what I do. That's
awesome.
what the realization process does.
So there is a oneness. And I think sometimes we get so conflicted and so we complicate things. Right. And I learned a long time ago the height of sophistication is simplicity. And sometimes it's just about, you know, taking a deep breath and letting go, and just becoming. So now when you talk about the realization process, how can it help people get unstuck today? Because, you know, we're coming and going in the hustle bustle of life, and everybody's just losing their mind, it seems like. And is there a way to just kind of hush that down and just reach a level of calm so that we can maybe move forward?
So 2 things, Kurt, and then I'm going to show you how to find that. Okay. It's much easier to feel this experience than to explain it. First, I want to say that yes, we are all made of the same molecules and atoms as the stars, but there is a deeper dimension of being that pervades everything that's matter and everything that's energy. It's deeper and more subtle than our attention that we pay for the focus of mindfulness. It's something that we can't measure because it has no structure and it has no movement. It can only be experienced, right? It only can be experienced. Someday, science is going to have a way to measure it. And I know a couple of brain scientists, neuroscientists, that are in the process of demonstrating what the brain does when we attune to this stillness, this ground of being, and how it changes us. Right? I'm going to show you that experience right now. Okay, so you can close your eyes if you wish. And everybody that's listening to this, I really encourage you to do this as well. And just rest your hands in your lap. Okay, your eyes can be open or closed. And just let yourself settle a little bit so that you're focused on yourself and not focused on me. And then let yourself become aware of your hands. Okay. And by being aware of your hands, you probably feel if they're tense or relaxed, if they're hot or cold. You might feel the fabric of of your trousers or whatever you're resting your hands on, or the air across. And let yourself notice from where you are experiencing, from where you are aware of your hands. Are you aware looking down from your head? Are you just aware from the surface of yourself, right? And let yourself just be aware of your hands, okay? Now enter in to your hands. Inhabit your hands. Feel that you're present inside your hands. So you're not just on the surface of yourself. Let yourself feel that you are a spaciousness, a stillness that pervades everywhere inside your hands, right? And this is inhabiting your hands, inhabiting your body. You have to be able to feel this stillness in order to disentangle from the movement. But you can only do it from inside your body. Okay. And then relax and tell me if you were able to feel that difference between being aware of yourself and inhabiting your body.
It actually felt heavy.
Heavy.
I feel the bones and the muscles and all the connective tissue and things going on. And everything just settled into the hands, and like they were heavy, almost pulsating.
Okay, so I want you to actually go a little more subtle. I want to invite you back inside your hands and feel the muscles and the bones, okay? Feel all the molecules, everything that's moving, and see if you can go a little bit more subtle. Thin out that density and feel the spaciousness that's there. Let it feel like you. And now you can feel the space pervading the bones and the muscles. And if that's the thing that we let go into. People aren't recognizing, though. People are just doing the letting go into letting go. But we're actually letting go into the ground. And when we let go into that spaciousness, the grip that we're holding on to the thing we're letting go of, the grip dissolves. And so the energy or the thought that we're gripping just becomes movement through the space, right? It doesn't necessarily, we don't have to hold on to it anymore, right? And in the dissolving, the healing happens, right?
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I found with massage, I saw a lot of other people would really have an issue with it. It's because the energy does flow through you, and you'll pick up other people's energy, their emotions and stuff. Because I've known people that would work on someone with a headache, and then they would get the headache.
Of course, they're running people's energy through their body. So in this work, the ground of being or unity of consciousness, whichever you want to call it, it's got a lot of different names. Buddha nature is another one of them, right? Because we are whole and we include the ground of being in the most subtle level of our energy, experience of energy, we can let all of life pass right the way through us without us grasping it. That doesn't mean we can't choose to pay attention to something or burrow into something or dig into something, but we learn to become transparent in our presence. And so we don't have to even run the energy through us and out. It's just movement passing through the space. And we're space, and then the movement is just the movement. One of the things that's wonderful about this work is that that space that we feel inside our body is the same space as outside our body. And our skin becomes a permeable barrier, a permeable boundary, right? So that as we deepen into the ground, we feel that oneness. We also feel our own autonomy and separateness at the same time. So we don't have to come out of our body or send our energy out for a relationship. We actually begin to relate with people and the world from the core of ourselves, from the subtle vertical core. And we learn to live and breathe at the deepest dimension of ourself. So we both have the stillness and the subtlest and grossest energy. We can have everything without getting entangled with it. That was the problem for me. I get back onto land and people's energies, I'm highly sensitive, so people's energies would overwhelm me and they'd get in the way of me feeling myself, right? Whereas with this, as you regain this part of your being that has been omitted from your learning as a human being, you come into deeper relationship with yourself, with the world. You learn to be able to be in relationship with someone and very clear about what you're feeling at the same time, right? So in the long run, if two people meet core to core in this space, the intimacy is beyond anything. That it's transcendent and focused and unified at the same time. Deepest contact with the self, deepest contact with the world. Very interesting.
Talk about disentangling yourself from the world. When I hear that, I kind of picture being caught up like in a web with things pulling you different ways. And if you can kind of like release from that, and that maybe you don't get caught up in it so much. It's interesting that the whole concept of disentangling and still being able to let yourself go out there. You say the ground of being is there to be found. What do you mean by that?
Let me show you. Okay. So you can close your eyes or have them open again and just let yourself be comfortable in your body, right? Be in contact with yourself in your body. And attune to the level of your being. And by attune, I mean come into harmony with and feel and experience the level of your being that's made of matter. This is all the muscles and the bones, right? The blood. It's kind of, you're focusing on how you feel after a good workout, right? Right. And let yourself feel how your relationship with your environment is when you're attuned primarily to the dimension of your being that's all material. You feel a little bit more separate, maybe, from your environment when you feel that way. Now find a level of your being, come into harmony with a level of your being that's energy. This is everything you know about yourself that's moving, your thoughts, your emotions, the neurons, your feelings, your breath. Come into harmony with that, attune to that, and feel that you're made of energy. That's the main focus of the level of who you are. And feel how your relationship with your environment, what does that feel like? You may feel moved, like you may feel merged or one, right? Everything's streaming through you. That's the dimension of energy. Now come more subtle inside yourself and see if you can find a stillness, a settledness, a spaciousness. Right? And let yourself feel how that pervades the energy and the matter. And when you're feeling this dimension of yourself that feels absolutely still, let yourself feel what your relationship with your environment is when you feel that. Right? That stillness. And that stillness then, Kurt, is the very ground of your being. Right? Your being is the energy, it's the matter. Both those are familiar to you. It's that stillness that we want you to learn to include in your experience of yourself. That's what's missing, right?
To me, it's the space.
It's the space.
And
right?
the reason I say that is because the greatest quantity of anything in the universe is empty space.
That's right. But it's not empty.
No,
it's actually not. It's lively and luminous.
Yeah.
And that luminosity in the space is the divine. Right?
Yeah,
that's what we interpret as the divine.
They're trying to explain dark matter and stuff and figure out what it is, and they have. But the deeper they go down, they realize there's more here than we think. You keep going, you keep going.
Or the layers of the onion, right?
Exactly. Does it ever run out?
Right.
That's awesome. Right. So let's talk a little bit about the subtle core of the body.
Yes, because you were interested in disentangling, and it's the subtle core that we go to disentangle, right? So the subtle vertical core, Hindu yoga calls it Sushumna, and Tibetan Buddhism call it the subtle channel, the central channel. And the chakra system is located along there. What we're doing with the subtle core is we're learning to wake it up so it becomes a vibrant part of ourselves that we can live in. It's not something that can be anatomically defined. We can't dissect ourselves and find the subtle vertical core. It's a subtle column of energy that's located just behind the midline of our body. There's a number of spiritual practices that locate it in the center of the body. I know martial arts does as well, but the subtle vertical core is actually slightly behind the midline, definitely in front of the spine. The spine is curved. The subtle vertical core is absolutely straight. And we only can find it by feel, by going back as deeply as we can into our body. Now, the wonderful thing about the subtle core is that any one point along the core can enter us into our internal wholeness. So we can go to any one point and nestle into it and have access to all of the interior space of our body and our whole being at once. This makes it very convenient. Once we know how to inhabit our body and can locate the subtle core, the inhabiting becomes a refinement of our experience already, and we go to the core to live. When we live and breathe in the subtle core, it allows us to disentangle our grasp on the energy and the matter of life. And that's all we want. If we start getting rid of things, we set up barriers and constrictions in our body. So we want to be able to live with everything, but without pain, without struggle. So we learn this little technique, big technique, but little, we call the subtle core breath, where we begin to actually initiate our breath within one point in the core. So instead of letting the external world give us the clue for breathing, we let this subtle interior ground of being that we're accessing through the core govern our relationship with the world. So let me help you find the core. Okay. All right. And we're going to do this through the heart center. The heart center is a familiar place for many people. So to find the heart center, find a point in the front of your body, in the middle of your chest. Our heart's on the left, but the heart center is in the center. And then take your focus, subtle focus, straight back through your body as deep as you can focus. Keep going back and back, almost to the very back of yourself. And you'll come to a place where there's like, oh, there I am. Or there's a lighten up, or there's an aha, or a feeling of wholeness comes in, right? You need to let go of your grip just a little bit more and settle back into that point. It almost feels like the back of your body opens up. You're feeling that, yeah?
It's like in front of my shoulders, in front of the shoulder blades.
So you might imagine that somebody that you trust has their finger gently in the middle of your upper back. And let yourself, with your focus, going from the front, find their finger. Right. Okay. Now, let your breath begin there. Rather than in your lungs, right? Let that point invite your breath and invite the exhale. It's an invitation. That's right. You have to let go of kind of your volition to breathe and trust that the breath is going to come from there. Almost like you have air in the core that you're breathing. Very subtle breath. Can you feel that?
It is a lot more subtle.
Very subtle breath. That breath we learn to refine, and it does two things. It disentangles us from the content of our experience. We don't want to not have the experience. We just don't want to grab onto it or grasp it. And it also, that breath takes us deeper into the ground of being. The more we can attune to and become one with the ground of being, the more of our wholeness we have to support us when we're stuck. And with this disentangling breath, we can not disengage, but we can disentangle from the stress or the thing that's holding us back. Right?
Can be in something, but you don't have to become the something.
That's it. That's it exactly, Kurt. We can be in the very center of the experience without being the experience, which allows us to have our own experience and use subtle discernment for what's happening with us.
Yeah, I think the modern day version would be, I am the eye of the storm.
It's definitely the I am.
Yeah.
Definitely the I am.
But that way, you know, things can be moving around you, but you still have that calm, that stillness. Right. So basically, wherever I am, it's the eye of the storm. It's the
yes,
center.
I am in the center.
Yeah, it's
of all of my experience.
That calm center with everything swirling around. Right. But it doesn't matter because where I'm at is calm.
But there's one more piece to that. We can feel that calmness, that quiet sense pervade this storm.
Yeah.
Right? So it pervades the storm. The stillness pervades the storm as well as me, right? So I can know everything about the storm without becoming it. Right?
That's interesting. So it helps you just completely get yourself centered.
Yes, that kind of happens, right?
Yeah, because you're centering by inhabiting the body. You're also centering yourself.
That's right.
It's kind of the two sides of the same coin.
That's exactly it, right? We live in the subtle core of the body, but in order to do that and have wholeness, we can't just live in our head center the way the non-dual meditators do. And we can't just give up to love the way the bhakti do, right? It's all love. It's all the ground of being, which because of our humanness has the feeling of love in it. But we need the ground of our physical sensation. We need that ground pervading everything, right? Not just the clarity of our mind or the compassion of our heart. We need it pervading our body. And we need to live inside, which is what we've lost as a species, right? The powerarchy has taken us away from that because it's a relational field. And if we don't have that depth of relationship with our environment, we have to rely on authority to tell us what it is.
You mean we can't get our humanity back through screen time?
Well, you know, we can in a way, because this work, can feel, I could feel where and how you were accessing the ground of being, even though you're up there in the northern part of the Pacific Northwest, and I'm down here in Southern Oregon. I could still feel through the space of the universe or whatever it was. I could feel when you touched in to the core, and I could feel when you were in the stillness in your body.
You know, it's interesting, and it's something that I found working with people through vehicles like Zoom and stuff, is you can be standing in the middle of a crowd and be completely isolated. And yet you can speak to somebody like we're speaking now over Zoom, and it's still an intimate, kind of interface. And that's what's important. Just a few things just to kind of cover as we start wrapping up a little bit. You talked about non-dual embodiment. What exactly is that? And, maybe cover the wholeness of being, just kind of these concepts that I have maybe an idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean my idea is right. As I said before, I may be wrong, but I'm seldom in doubt.
Yes. Essentially, wholeness of being and non-dual embodiment are basically the same thing. So non-duality is the concept that there's a oneness to everything. There's no dualism. We can experience non-dual embodiment this way. Put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. Okay. Now find your right hand with your mind. Find your left hand with your mind. Now find both hands at the same time. Right? Finding both hands at the same time is a non-dual experience. And your hands are part of your embodiment. So that's actually a very gross form of non-dual embodiment, two as one, right? Okay. So we're talking about a larger story, a wholeness story, where you are inhabiting the body as this unchanging ground. That's the great thing about the ground of being. It never changes. So as we come into our body and inhabit it, right, we discover a dimension of ourself that's never been broken, that doesn't have to be fixed. We have all this, our emotions and our thoughts are moving and changing all the time. And we work with that, and that's good, right? Because we have patterns that we've laid down of that we want to unwind that aren't serving us any longer as adults. But in this place that we have, it's incredibly supportive because it never changes and it pervades everything. So that makes it unified, like non-duality. We're in our body, that's embodiment, right? And wholeness of being then is to have both the experience of the ground of being, of the stillness, and also the movement of all of life, right? So that we can be whole. We are stillness and movement at the same time. But the movement flows in a disentangled way so that it doesn't interrupt our attunement and our experience of that unbreakable part of ourselves, right? And that part of ourselves that never changes. And that's a very subtle part because all it is really is the feeling of yourself in your body. And it doesn't have any content. It's not a thought. It's not the part of yourself that changes. It's the part of yourself that's been with you since you were born, and it'll be there since you died, and it's very subtle and it doesn't move, but it differentiates yourself from someone. So that's what wholeness of being is, to have all of those parts. And the pundits would call it non-dual embodiment. Right?
Well, one last thing before we kind of wrap up. We touched briefly on disentangling and disengagement, and why is it more meaningful to disentangle than to disengage?
Okay, great. That's a great question, Kurt. When we disengage, we set up a boundary and a barrier between the thing that we don't want to be affected by, right? We have to expend energy and we have to make a constriction. We have to shut some part of ourself off in order to disengage, right? When we disentangle, the only thing we let go of is the grip. So everything will still be there and we can receive it just as it is without trying to change or alter it or ourselves in any way. So disentangling gives us everything without the struggle, right? And without the overwhelm. It's the perfect focus for healing because we're working with patterns of lifestyle that interfere with us being our most authentic self. Right. So we want to disentangle the thing that triggers us. Every time that happens, I get triggered and I try not to get triggered, but I can't. And so we use that. There's all sorts of techniques in this work. There we have, I don't know, about 100 different practices that you can learn and use for different situations to deepen yourself so that you don't need the practices anymore to cope with life. You just use the different practices to deepen your experience.
Sounds awesome. Well, this has been a very enlightening interview. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, Kurt.
And I understand that you have a gift for people, so why don't you let people know where you can be found and what you've got coming for them.
Okay, so if you want to get in touch with me personally, is embodied nonduality.com. And then my gift is access to my new interactive website, which has 14 practices on it recorded for you to practice with. So the things that we've done today are on there, but extended versions of them, and a lot of the other experiences available to you by attuning to the ground of being. And that website address is nondual embodiment.net.